Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Teresa Gano, Project Associate for Lifetime Learning in UVA's Office of Engagement. We have people from 30 states, the District of Columbia, and 10 countries registered for today's presentation, Women's Voices, Health, Politics, and Empowerment. And we are thrilled to welcome you. We received many questions in advance of this program. Should you have a question during the program, please add it to the Q&A box. Our speakers will answer as many questions as time permits. We are recording this event and we'll post it on our website in a couple of weeks. We are fortunate to have 4 University of Virginia scholars with us today: Francesca Calamita, Tiffany King, Farzaneh Milani, and Abby Palko. Abby Palko will facilitate today's conversation. Abby Palko holds a PhD in literature with a graduate minor in gender studies from the University of Notre Dame, in an MA in English literature from Rutgers University, and a BA in English and French from Chestnut Hill College in Philadelphia. Abby is the director of the Maxine Platzer Lynn Women's Center. I'm going to say that again because it's important to get that right. Maxine Platzer Lynn Women's Center at the University of Virginia. She provides executive leadership for the Women's Center, whose team includes engaged scholarship, counseling, and wellness services. She leads a team of interns who work to celebrate women's accomplishments across grounds, including highlighting milestones in women's education at UVA. Her scholarship focuses on cultural representations and contestations of mothering practices. Abby, we welcome you to this Lifetime Learning Engaging the Mind program, and the microphone is all yours.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It's lovely to be here today, and I have the pleasure of introducing our 3 panelists. With us today, we have Farzaneh Milani, who is the Raymond J. Nelson Professor of Iranian Literature and Gender Studies here at UVA. She is the former chair of the Department of Middle Eastern and South Asian Languages and Cultures, and past director of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies and Middle East Studies programs. Dr. Milani has published several books and articles in Persian and English. She's written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, Christian Science Monitor, Ms. Magazine, Reader's Digest International, USA Today, All Things Considered, among others. She has presented more than 270 lectures nationally and internationally. A past president of the Association of Middle Eastern Women's Studies in America and a Carnegie Fellow, Milani was the recipient of the All-University Teaching Award in 1999, the Zinto Leadership Award in 2015, and the Cavaliers Distinguished Teaching Award and Professorship in 2020. The Nobel Committee of the Swedish Academy invited Professor Milani to join it as a member of its board of external experts for literature in 2021. She will serve in that capacity for 3 years. We also have Francesca Calamita, who is an associate professor of the Academic General Faculty member in the Department of Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, and an affiliated faculty member of the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality. She's the director of the Undergraduate Programs in Italian Studies and director of UVA in Siena and Florence. Calamita works in the area of women, gender, and sexuality in European and global contexts, and she is internationally recognized for her publications on the fictional depiction of eating disorders and other complex relationships with body and food in Italian literature and culture. Women's voices and visibility are at the center of her research and teaching, and she is a strong advocate for women's rights in and outside the university context. The author of 2 monographs in Italian, which I cannot say without a French accent, Linguini del Speranze Femminili from 2015, and Visibili e Influencia from 2023. She's also co-editor of Starvation, Food Obsession and Identity, and Eve Sinful's Bite. Calamita is the ideator and co-author of Diversitali from 2022, the first textbook around the world to teach Italian with gender equality. And our third panelist today is Tiffany King, who's an associate professor in the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. In the department, she teaches feminist theories and methods, Black and Indigenous Feminisms, Black Gender and Sexuality, and Transnational Feminisms. Professor King is the author of The Black Shoals, Offshore Formations of Black and Native Studies, which won the Lorna Romero First Book Prize. She's co-editor of the collection Otherwise Worlds, Against Settler Colonialism and Anti-Blackness. Professor King is also a co-director at the Black and Indigenous Feminist Futures Institute at UVA. And I'm thrilled to be here moderating this panel with the three of you. For the audience to know, today's panel began with the intention of offering it in March for International Women's Day, which was established in 1911 and is celebrated globally on March 8th. It is an important moment for working to advance women's equality. International Women's Day belongs to, in the words of the committee, everyone, everywhere, aiming to be a truly inclusive and eclectic moment of impact worldwide. It marks, according to the committee, a call to action for accelerating gender parity. While schedule-wise, it did not work to host this panel in March, Teresa and I agreed that we could extend the celebration of the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women, as International Women's Day does, to a second day in the year. All joking aside, the women who are joining me for this conversation have a number of crucial insights to share as we consider the current uneven status of women across the world. According to the World Economic Forum's 2022 Global Gender Gap Report, which benchmarks the current state and evolution of gender parity across 4 key dimensions, which are economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. It will take 132 years to reach full parity at the current rate of progress. This is a significant loss since 2020, when parity was projected to be reached in 100 years. So in the last 3 years, we lost 32 years. As a point of comparison, think back 132 years from today. That would take us back to 1891. Think of all that has changed since 1891 to 2023. And yet we're still working for gender parity. The Global Gender Gap Report continues to note an emerging crisis in the workplace. This is from the report. More women have been moving into paid work and increasingly leadership positions, yet globally societal expectations, employer policies, the legal environment, and the availability of care continue to play an important role in the choice of educational tracks and career trajectories. The decade of austerity that followed the 2008 global financial crisis constrained sectors that provide the core of social infrastructure, affecting outcomes for families and primary caregivers, often women, during the pandemic. Geopolitical conflict and climate change both impact women disproportionately. In addition, the projected deepening of the current cost of living crisis is also likely to impact women more severely than men, as women continue to earn and accumulate wealth at lower levels. When I read that paragraph in the report, I thought gratefully of the work my colleagues are doing, work that they will share with you shortly. We can think about the gendered interplay between voice and empowerment from a number of angles. The ability to use your voice is a crucial component of exercising the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. How that voice is heard and responded to is influenced by gender. According to a study out of BYU led by Jessica Priest, women were routinely seen as the least competent and influential in teams when they were outnumbered by men. According to research sponsored by C. Jane, the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and in the Media, even among the top grossing G-rated family films, girl characters are outnumbered by boys 3-1. That's the same ratio that has existed since the end of World War II. For decades, male characters have dominated nearly 3/4 of speaking parts in children's entertainment, and 83% of film and TV narrators are male. For me, this finding immediately calls to mind Disney's The Little Mermaid and its exploration of what it means for a woman to own her voice. And it also seems to me the perfect way to turn over the microphone to Farzaneh Milani, who will kick us off thinking about the first section on voice and empowerment. Farzaneh, it's yours.
Thank you, Abby, and good afternoon, everyone. I feel honored to be in the company of my prominent colleagues and in the presence of such a distinguished audience. As a writer whose books are banned in her country of birth, I do not take for granted the chance to share my views with you openly and candidly. So thank you for the chance, and thank you for listening. I think it is fair to say that the recent protests in Iran have attracted the attention and the admiration of the world. Who could have imagined only a few months ago that despite the Islamic Republic's desire to isolate Iran and to resegregate the society, Iranian women would be celebrated on the world stage? Who could have predicted that a group of people considered in the West as voiceless, powerless, and captive of their veils would inspire the world? My friend, this is the first time in the history of Iran and perhaps the world that a women-led revolution ignited by the death of a young woman revolves mainly around women's issues and has the full support of many men. What is unique and most consequential about these nonviolent demonstrations is their reliance on words. This is not surprising. Most Iranians share a deep-seated reverence for words. We grow up kissing books. We go on pilgrimage to the mausoleums of our poets. Literature is sacred in Iran. It is our national scripture. But alas, readers, rulers, and dictators also know the lasting impact of words. So fear of the written word is as old as Iranian literature itself, which is over 1,000 years of written literature. Admittedly, the choice of literature as a career has been both exalted and perilous in Iran. It has been especially hazardous for women. In a recent interview, Mahsa Moheb Ali, a talented and prize-winning novelist, said, "If you are a writer in Iran, you have made two mistakes. Being a woman is the first, being a writer is the second." Moheb Ali has a point. Sex segregation has established a close relationship between women's bodies and women's voices. And the veil has covered, for most of its complicated history, not only women's bodies, but also their public voices and words. For centuries, in addition to divides defined by class, ethnicity, and religion, there existed another partition of the social order in Iran. This one was based strictly on anatomy. Visible and invisible walls and veils separated the worlds of men and women who were not related to each other by marriage or blood. Since mid-19th century, however, Iranians, both male and female, began to challenge sex segregation. Women writers and poets have been at the forefront of this desegregating movement. As early as 1848, that is a few weeks before the Seneca Falls Convention, celebrated throughout the world. An Iranian woman, also a poet, Tahireh Qurratul Ain, walked into a congregation of 81 men and unveiled her face and her voice. Furor continued till she left. Since then, desegregation has run like a unifying thread through the work of female writers. Metaphors of restraint and captivity thus exist side by side with the desire to push boundaries into forbidden spaces. Generations of women have sacrificed life and limb for voice, visibility, and mobility. The 1979 revolution, which was a backlash to all this, they wanted to resegregate the society. Their message to women was clear. Hide your body, cover your voice, and relinquish your words. But women have refused to be silenced or to disappear from the scene. I believe no leader, no matter how brutal, no regime, no matter how violent, can handcuff, imprison, or assassinate this non-violent rebirth of an old and resilient culture. What we are witnessing in Iran these days is a renaissance. In the words of the iconic poet Forough Farrokhzad, who was banned after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, this is not about fearful whispers in the dark. It's about light and open windows and fresh air. It's about a stove in which everything useless is burning. It's about a field pregnant with a new crop. It's about a rebirth. If we accept that poetry knows more than the poets, just as art knows more than the artist, I think Iranian women will rebuild their country. So allow me to end with a few words by another iconic poet, Simin Behbahani. My country, I will build you again, if need be, with bricks made from my life. I will build columns to support your roof, if need be, with my bones. I will wash away the blood of your body with torrents of my tears. And when darkness leaves my home, I will paint my poems blue with the color of your sky. Thank you for listening, and my apologies for my voice.
Farzaneh, please do not ever apologize for your voice. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. I'm going to hand it over now to Francesca, who will continue the thought about voice and where we see it and hear it.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm very honored to be with you today. As my colleague Farzaneh Milani was suggesting, with the example of the Iranian context, women's voices are critical to achieve gender equality and creating a more equitable society from a global point of view. I would like to start with some general consideration today. As many of you know, empowerment is about giving individuals, particularly marginalized groups, which often still includes women, the knowledge and resources they need to make informed decisions. Engagement, on the other hand, refers to the active involvement of individuals in the decision-making process. So, women's voices are crucial to both empowerment and engagement. For example, women's voices have played a critical role in advancing gender equality in the workplace by sharing our experience of discrimination, harassment, and unequal pay. We have been able to push for policy changes. However, women's voices are still often marginalized or silenced in many areas of society. In my latest book, in Italian, Visibili e Influenti, which can be translated into English as Visible and Influential Woman, I address this issue, particularly in university setting, in relation to the languages we speak, and more broadly in society and the political context. My work in Italian culture and society is very similar to the one by Caroline Criado Perez, who in Invisible Women argues that many of the data sets used to make decisions and design products are based on the male experience. And as a result, they often fail to account for the needs and experiences of women. Similar remarks can be found in Rebecca Solnit's Men Explain Things to Me. I'm going to tell you for today some data from the Italian context. The most important Italian literary prize, called Premio Strega, was awarded over the years only to 11 women. We had 70 winners in total, and only 11 women were awarded such prestigious prize. If we change country and we go in France, the Goncourt Prize has a very similar ratio. Let me tell you that the highest percentage of women in Senate and Parliament in Italy has never reached more than 35%. The current party in charge, which is led by a woman, Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, is the one with less women in both Senate and Parliament. And I could give you much more numbers and data. At this point, someone may also say that we have reached equality in university settings, for example. But let me ask you a few questions. How many women writers are the norm rather than the exception in a survey of literature course? How many articles written by women do we find in the sources of a syllabus? And a broader question for the audience. How many women were mentioned in your history class at high school in comparison with men? The first message I would like to share with you today is that it's essential that we work to amplify women's voices and create spaces for them to be heard, including in outlets where we believe we have achieved all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for sharing those thoughts. And now I will turn it over to Tiffany King to keep us thinking about voices and visibility.
Thank you so much, Abby, and thank you, Tressa, for the invitation to be with everyone this afternoon. I'm quite honored. And as Abby very accurately introduced me, I do focus on researching Black and Indigenous people's lives, and particularly Black and Indigenous people's lives here in the Americas, with specific attention to North America. And if people were to think of some recent social movements like Black Lives Matter, also Standing Rock that happened in Dakota Sioux lands, people might have images of figures like George Floyd, or people may be thinking of water defenders who are standing off with police folks. And it's often hard to surface issues of gender, or even surface people who are women or femme-identified or trans or queer. So the work that I'm actually a part of with two co-directors here at the University of Virginia, Casey Jernigan and Sonia Alcanini, our work really tries to think about intersectional work that needs to happen in both fields of Black studies and Indigenous studies to actually surface the voices and the work that feminists are doing in the areas of research, of art, of community organizing, and activism. And so we actually try to, and have successfully brought scholars to campus. I hope people can actually check out our website and get a sense of programming that we do, both the past programming and the upcoming programming. But for instance, in the fall of 2022, we brought dynamic scholars, Sharon P. Holland, who's a Black queer studies scholar, and Jody Bird, who's an Indigenous queer studies scholar, to help us think about LGBTQTI issues in both communities. And they focused on that in their research and some of the informal and formal talks that they had with students and faculty on campus. And then if people were fortunate enough to catch our speaker series in April, We had a conversation with Billy Ray Belcourt, who identifies as a queer writer and poet, who talked to us about his big debut novel, A Minor Course. And we also had a conversation with a Black feminist artist and writer, Bettina Judd, about her new book, Feelin', which focused on Black women's creative production and what's generative about that, particularly politically and intellectually. And so we're going to continue actually working with artists and scholars for the next 3 years. So we hope that you can join some of our programming. And we're also really attentive to the ways that the landscape here at UVA makes issues, particularly Black and Indigenous women's issues, particularly important to think about as we think about the kinds of injustices or violences that people here in Charlottesville at UVA might have to contend with and organize around and build a collective capacity through spaces like the Women's Center or my own department, and as student organizers and alumni. And so I'll be sharing the work of my co-director, who's in conversation with an amazing artist whose exhibit is here this week, as well as one of our incredible collaborators, Marisa Williamson. I'll talk a little bit about their work as I close off.
Thank you so much. I'm going to let your words stand as our segue going into the second section, where each of you are going to come back and think a little more focused on an area that has to do with either health or politics, and thinking about presence and integration into the community, and how voice and hearing of voices can be the way that people know and feel that they belong. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Francesca first.
Thank you, Abby. In this section, I will talk about 2 different political issues, which are some way interrelated: eating disorder and women's visibility in languages. Let me start with eating disorder first. So from the much debated episode of Eve and the apple in Western countries to present-day society, women's eating habits have been read not only as an act of self-nourishment, but also as a display of affection, sexuality, and tendency to sin. This relationship between women and food reaches its crisis point in the development of contemporary discussion on eating disorders, which, however, have existed under various ways and names for centuries. Pathological starvation and binging are an idiomatic and paradoxical language employed by women, and more recently by men, to communicate their deepest feelings, express their identity, and protest about their sociocultural roles. Since the 1970s, feminist scholars have highlighted the significant link between anorexia nervosa and social context. And you may have heard very important publications such as Fat is a Feminine Issue by Susie Orbach, or The Angry Self by Kim Chernin, as well as The Anorexic Experience by Marilyn Lawrence, or Morak McSween, Anorexic Bodies. All these scholars suggest that eating disorders and tribal relationship with food are strategies adopted by women in order to say what they cannot express with the conventional language of words. Therefore, according to them, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, and other complex pathologies related to body and food become an alternative and self-destructive way of communication that, however, give them the opportunity to replace the conventional verbal language they are unable to use. In this light, even if very controversially and paradoxically, eating disorder become also self-empowering. They are self-destructive, yet they offer an opportunity to say what cannot be expressed in words. And there is a long list of novels that also address this concern. For example, in Italian literature, I would suggest Michela Marzano, Volevo essere una farfalla, I wanted to be a butterfly, while in American literature, I would suggest to read Luis de Salvo, Vertigos. Talking about eating disorder as a kind of language also make us think if we are visible in the spoken conventional language. So you may know that in several languages, masculine nouns are still often used with a generic function to refer to both men and women, with the negative effect of making women disappear. An example of this practice is uomo, homme, hombre, men, to refer to humanità, humanité, humanitat, humankind. In English, humankind has recently replaced by mankind, which is, however, very often still used. In Italian, some of you may know this, all nouns are either masculine or feminine, and adjectives and pronouns must agree in gender with the noun they modify or replace. This can create a binary view of gender that exclude those who do not identify strictly as male or female. However, Italian, like Spanish and French, has also a tendency to use the masculine form as a default or generic form, even when referring to mixed gender. This can reinforce traditional gender roles and exclude women and non-binary individuals from visibility and representation. This gender language can have significant impacts on society. And in fact, research in the field of sociolinguistics has shown that the use of masculine forms as a default can contribute to implicit gender bias and discrimination against women and non-binary individuals. However, there are many efforts to promote more inclusive language. And I'm referring here particularly to the Italian context, but similar efforts happen also in French and in Spanish. In my next PowerPoint slides, you can also see some of these examples. Abby, would you mind to step one slide? Here it is. You can see some example to create a more inclusive Italian language. More in general, the European Institute for Gender Equality has published several toolkits on gender-sensitive communication, not only in specific languages spoken in the European Union, but also in English. And then on the same PowerPoint, you can also see my textbook, the one that Abby actually mentioned earlier on, Diversitaly. And this is the first textbook around the world to teach and learn Italian with inclusive language and gender equality. But there is also many efforts that native speakers are attempting to use. And you see, again, on my PowerPoint, a list of pluralization that can be used when we address a group of people. There's no need only to use the universal masculine form. There are ways to integrate women. There are ways to integrate all identity, for example, by using asterisk, schwa, slash, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca. We're going to turn now to Farzaneh. Farzaneh is going to pick up on some of Francesca's thoughts to think a little bit about beauty.
The female body has been used as a battlefield, as a metaphor for health or safety, for tradition, for beauty or desirability, for security. But notions of beauty, I want to argue with you today, have often controlled and contained women's bodies and denied them the right to move about freely. Static women, the sleeping beauties, the immobilized and the silenced one have been lauded in world literature, whereas those who are on the move, for instance, the suffragists on their bicycle, have been vilified. In the Muslim world, women's public presence, and whether they are veiled or not, has been at the heart for the last 2 centuries of a relentless struggle for democracy and human rights. Although veiling rules are different in different countries, and they cannot be understood outside of their historical context, but I think it's safe to say that the veil, as a sign and symbol of segregation, has restrained women's freedom of movement. But let me hasten to add here that the desire to control women's mobility is not confined to one faith, one country, or one region. Different cultures have restricted women's freedom of movement in different ways and to different degrees. Some practices and institutions are visible, much more visible than some of the more subtle ones. Take foot binding, for instance. The deforming, shrinking procedure, like veiling, reduced the parameters of a woman's universe by hampering her mobility. And again, foot binding, like veiling, was not considered only a religious or cultural ordinance, but it was also a beautification practice. It was a mark of gentility, of refinement, of chastity, purity, and desirability. Consider Cinderella. She owns her ascendancy from rags to riches only or mainly to her tiny feet, feet that were smaller than all the other women in her country. Unsurprisingly, some of the oldest written versions of the Cinderella tale, one of the most popular in the world, comes from China, congruent with the beginning of the practice of foot binding. World literature is full of sleeping beauties, and they couldn't be more immobile and silent. Most of them are waiting for a man galloping on a horse to come and save them. No wonder Margaret Atwood tells us there is probably a simple reason for this. Send a woman out alone on a rambling nocturnal quest, and she's likely to end up a lot deader, a lot sooner than a man would. Would Little Riding Hood, who, by the way, was really not riding on anything, have confronted the big bad wolf if she had obediently cast down her eyes under her little red hood and kept her little walking shoes on the designated path? Conversely, are not female witches, those counter-ideal women, often portrayed with big and flat shoes and turning their broomsticks, the very sign and symbol of their domesticity, into a vehicle to carry them to forbidden places, not be considered the counter-ideal women? Are not women viewed as the lowest category of female sex workers, called streetwalkers? Are not women running to this day in parts of the world for offices, often confronting the slogans loud and clear? Send her back, lock her up. And the good thing is that there is finally a competing narrative of women's beauty and mobility that is gaining more and more currency. This new definition of beauty supplants stillness with motion, silence with words. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Farzaneh. I'm going to turn it right back over to Tiffany, who will talk about a few projects that are happening right here at UVA right now.
Thank you so much, Abby. I'm making an assumption that the people in the audience today have been to UVA's campus. And if you have not, certainly you know that UVA's campus is a very historic place, and we have been in both national and international news for over the past 6 years because of the ways that this very space is contested, and it means different things to various kinds of people, and those people compete over the ideas of what the university means and what it's a symbol for, right? So people may know of Jefferson's Monticello, certainly the academical village and its grounds often signifies to people an idea of universitas, what is rational, what kinds of minds can be linked to a rational citizen, what is beautiful, right? So what is artful? But some other historical markers that you may not know about are right under our feet here. So leading to the rotunda off Main Street is, and I'm talking about the plaque on the right, is a memorial to enslaved laborers. And one of the plaques speaks to a very difficult story in history of sexual violence committed against enslaved women here in Albemarle County, and specifically at Monticello and at the university itself. On the left, there is a statue of the Shoshone woman, Sacagawea, who many people do not know was sold to a trapper, a Quebecois trapper, Toussaint Charbonneau, who actually helped Lewis and Clark, who were commissioned by Jefferson on the Expedition West. So was a captive, right? A person who was made to be a translator for two white explorers commissioned by Jefferson, right? And so one of the things that BFI, the Black and Indigenous Feminist Institute, has committed itself to is thinking about the very landscape that we're on and what voices actually have been silenced and how to surface those voices. So we have been particularly interested in, and Abby, if you could move forward, in working with artists who actually use aesthetics and other kinds of modes that may be nonverbal. And I'm so glad that Francesca helped us think about how eating disorders create a different kind of language to express things that cannot be spoken or are not spoken. So the body is really important. So on the left, you see the Fralins advertising for Jamie Black's Red Dress Project, which is still here at UVA through Sunday, and people should absolutely go and see the exhibit. So red dresses as a symbol of Indigenous women's power and voice, right? And they're mobilizing around this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and relations, right? It's still up. And Jamie Black actually gives voices to people who have been disappeared, who we often cannot hear from, right, in this particular moment, and does it through creating presence through the visually arresting red dress, which is now actually on various spots on campus as well as at the Fralin, right? So this particular artistic practice of creating presence and embodiment that has been disappeared, like Sacagawea's, is really powerful. And our co-director, Casey Jernigan, was in conversation with Jamie Black, the Métis artist, on the 28th, and hopefully the Fralin will make that conversation available. It should be in their archive. We also work with an art professor, Marisa Williamson, who has spent a great deal of time here researching the lives of enslaved women, both at Monticello, so of course people know of Sally Hemings, but also here on grounds, and similarly does the work of creating a presence through her own embodied practice. So there are tours that she actually guides for people on the academical village, and one of her projects, which is on her website, is a celebration of the life of Sally Hemings, and she actually features a dress to have us think about Sally Hemings's body, the way that she took up space, and what the contours of her experience and voice might be. And Marisa Williamson continues to collaborate with us, and will be working with us over the next 3 years. So these are some ways that we actually approach voice and empowerment. And both of these issues are directly linked to contemporary work around reproductive justice, right? Bodily autonomy, not just for people who would be understood as women, but also for people who are trans and non-binary, and particularly the fights in the US Supreme Court, and also statewide fights in Texas and Florida that are trying to actually remove LGBTQI curriculum, as well as Black studies curriculum from school systems, are a fight about voice, right? And so these are two projects that are ongoing at the university that people who are interested in this issue can continue to check out and engage.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. As Teresa and I were thinking about the scope for this event, we said, it could be hours. It could be hours. She's going to take over in 2 minutes. So just to quick close, I wonder, Tiffany, if you'd like to say just a word or two about the work of Sister Song, because we had not gotten to that. And Francesca, I'll ask you to come on. There's been a request for the titles of the novels you talked about. And then 1 minute, Farzaneh, there's a question about how we can support women in Iran right now. And I don't know if we can possibly do all that in 2 minutes, but let's try.
Sister Song, and I don't know if Althea has the link. I'm sorry I didn't send it ahead. I apologize. Is a nonprofit organization based in Atlanta, Georgia, founded by Loretta Ross, who is one of the people who coined the term reproductive justice, and particularly the way that it circulates and is being used now. And they actually are comprised of a board of women of color and trans folks and non-binary folks who have broadened the idea of choice and a move towards reproductive justice to think about reproduction as things like stopping the disappearance and murder of Indigenous women, right? Because that is an issue of futurity and bodily autonomy. And also thinking about stopping state violence against particularly Black people, which is also a reproductive issue, but is often not framed that way. So broadening our understanding of reproductive capacity and futurity beyond a fight for abortion, but also bringing it home, particularly now in the struggle for bodily autonomy around trans people's rights to make decisions about their gendered bodies and selves and lives. So please check them out if you're able to. And I think it's sistersong.com, I'm pretty sure.
Francesca, could you just give us the names of the novels? Was it Vertigo and?
Yes, Abby, the novels I mentioned are Vertigo by Luis de Salvo, an American author of Italian origins, and Volevo essere una farfalla, I Wanted to be a butterfly by Italian philosopher Michela Marzano.
Thank you. Farzaneh, I'll give you the closing words on how we can support women in Iran now.
Thank you for that kind question. We can amplify their voices here. We can read their works, and we can write to the multi-billion-dollar industry in this country, which is only interested in blockbusters and not in works of translation, not only from Iran, although I would love it if there would be more translation from Iran, but also from the rest of the world. The rate of translation, literary translation in particular in this country from the rest of the world, is really not something to be very proud of.
Thank you all for such rich thoughts about women's voices. It's been a pleasure to moderate this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Teresa.
Thank you, Abby, Francesca, Tiffany, and Farzaneh, for this informative presentation and conversation around women's voices. Abby, you're right. We called it. This could have gone on until the late hours of the evening, I believe. And the audience was quite engaged. Thank you so much for your questions. We will collect these titles and send them out in an email to you because there were a lot of engaged participants, attendees who would like to follow up and engage with these links and books that you all have referenced today. Thank you. What a great afternoon. We're appreciative of all of your time and expertise. Thank you very much. And thank you for your participation today. We invite you to join us for future Office of Engagement programming, both in person and online. You can find specific details and registration links to upcoming programs, faculty blogs, podcasts, and podcasts at engagement.virginia.edu/learn. From all of us at Lifetime Learning, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to our next shared learning opportunity with you, and we wish you a great rest of your day.